What happens when a god's perfect script for the future shatters against the stubborn, flawed humanity of its characters? Welcome to the tragic, twisted heart of Mushoku Tensei Volume 19, where a rescue mission becomes a funeral procession, a brother's love becomes a weapon, and the most feared being on the continent just wants a little appreciation for his cooking. This is not a story about saving a kingdom. It's about watching it burn and desperately searching for an ember of hope in the ashes. The familiar, cluttered sanctuary of Zanoba's laboratory, a place usually filled with the sacred scent of sawdust and the holy glow of varnish. But today, the air was thick with a different substance entirely: dread. You could taste it, a metallic tang of impending tragedy. 6 of us were gathered. No, 7. If you count the infant in Ellen Elise's arms, a tiny, oblivious soul in a room of heavy hearts. And what a portrait of misery we made. Cliff, ever the pragmatist, wore a frown that could curdle milk. Julie's eyes were red raw from tears. Ginger looked as if she were attending a funeral in advance. And Zanoba, my dear, monstrously strong Zanoba, his face, usually alight with the simple, blazing joy of a new figurine, was a mask of solemn stone. It's terrifying when the sun goes out, isn't it? When the one person you count on for uncomplicated enthusiasm becomes the source of the complication. The cause of this pall was a letter. Not just any letter, but a masterpiece of political spin and shameless audacity from the kingdom of Shirone, courtesy of one Pax Shirone, Zanoba's dear brother. A 3-page epic of fratricide, regicide, and breathtaking entitlement. Page 1, the heroic ballad of King Pax, returning from his studies abroad, a charming euphemism for exile, to liberate his homeland by, murdering his father and the rest of the royal family. A real prince. Charming story, that one. Page 2, the excuses. A litany of it wasn't my fault, and the purges were necessary, all leading to the inevitable conclusion that the army was now, predictably, a mess. And when your house is on fire because you lit the match, who do you call? The one brother you exiled, of course. Page 3, the draft notice. A formal royal command, stamped and sealed, summoning an exiled prince home to clean up the mess. The sheer, unadulterated gall of it was almost impressive. And Zanoba's response to this transparent death warrant: I shall go. Just like that. As if he'd been invited to a mildly inconvenient tea party. Cue the logical objections from our resident voice of reason, Cliff. It's a trap. He'll use you and then dispose of you, he argued, slamming the table for emphasis. And he was right, of course. Every word was a diamond of pure, unassailable logic. When you usurp a throne, you don't leave popular, potential rivals lying around, especially not ones with a history of mutual loathing. But logic, my friends, is a language that fanatics and fatalists refuse to speak. Zanoba acknowledged the danger, nodded along with the grim prognosis, and then declared he was going anyway. Why? For duty? For a concept? For the idea of a nation that had, let's be brutally honest, every reason to want him dead. And this is where the chapter truly breaks your heart. Because Zanoba, in his own blunt, terrifying way, laid out his life's ledger. The head-ripping prince, the accidental killer of an infant brother. The man who, on his wedding night, literally ripped his bride's head off. He was a walking catastrophe, a political liability of the highest order. So why was he spared execution all those times? Why was he given a comfortable exile here in Sharia? His conclusion was as simple as it was devastating. So that I could fight for my country when she truly needs me. He saw his entire life, his very existence, as a down payment. A weapon kept in storage, to be drawn only in the kingdom's most dire, and the bow had finally come due. How do you argue with that? How do you tell a man that the purpose he has carved for himself from a lifetime of guilt and violence is a fool's errand? You can't. I looked into his eyes, saw the calm, stoic resignation, and I knew this wasn't the Zanoba who lived for the perfect curve of a figurine's waist. This was Prince Zanoba of Shirone, a ghost from his own past, ready to fulfill his contract. It was a decision worthy of a tragic hero from some old epic. And I, for one, have never had much stomach for tragedy when it involves my friends. So I did the only thing a self-respecting, chronically over-involved isekai protagonist could do. I'm going to The words left my mouth before my sense of self-preservation could file a formal complaint. The flicker of conflicted emotion on Zanoba's face, gratitude warring with fear for my safety, was all the confirmation I needed. This was the right, stupid, and inevitable path. A quick consultation with my ever-glowering boss, Orsted, confirmed my suspicions. The stank of the man. God. A trap. Beautifully baited with the one thing I couldn't ignore. A loyal friend. In one timeline, Shirone becomes a glorious republic under Pats. In another, it remains a backwater kingdom. But here now, it was a stage set for an ambush. The man, God, was willing to sacrifice his own long-term geopolitical plans just for a shot at me. I'd be flattered if it weren't so horrifying. Orsted's plan was, as always, elegantly brutal. He would go to the King Dragon Realm to hunt the Puppet Master, while I, the designated bait, would walk willingly into the jaws of the trap in Shirone. My mission? Protect Zanoba, uncover the plot, and, here's the kicker, do not kill Shirone. Because destiny, in its infinite wisdom, apparently needs that patricidal maniac alive to found a republic someday. The absurdity is not lost on me, so here we are. On to march into a hostile nation surrounded by enemies, protecting a friend on a suicide mission, while my hands are tied by the dictates of a future I'm trying to prevent. All while a malevolent god cackles from the shadows. Typical. Just another day in the life of Rudeus Greyrat, the fishing lure for a dragon god walking straight into the piranha tank. Let's just hope I'm made of stronger stuff than they think. And so, the stage was set. The noble, if utterly mad, decision was made. Zanoba would march to his potential doom, and I, the ever-loyal and chronically incapable of minding my own business Rudeus Greyrat, would be his escort. But before one can stroll into a carefully laid death trap, there are logistics, and worse still, there is the small matter of telling your 3 wives you're going to miss the birth of your child to go on a suicide mission with your best friend. The scene in the Greyrat household was a masterclass in domestic whiplash. On one side, you had the grim reality, a journey of months, meaning I would undoubtedly miss the birth of Eris's child. I prepared for this storm, for the righteous fury, for the tearful pleasure. What I got was stoic acceptance. Eris, my fiery sword wife, folded her arms over her swollen belly and essentially shrugged. I don't need Rudeus around to have a baby. The sheer unadulterated toughness of that statement left even Sylphiette, the voice of reason, sputtering about the emotional value of hand-holding. It was a surprisingly considerate move from Eris, a woman not always known for her subtlety. She was trying to make it easier for me to be the strong one, and yet, a part of me couldn't help but feel a little. Was my role in the miracle of life so dispensable? It's a confusing feeling, being simultaneously grateful for and wounded by your wife's self-sufficiency. But the real drama, the moment that sent a chill down my spine and heralded the true nature of this folly, came from the quietest member of the family. Nora, my infant daughter, the one blessed or cursed with the attention of a sacred beast. The girl who rarely made a sound, who observed the world with the weary eyes of an ancient sage. As I tried to wrap up the conversation, she erupted. This wasn't a normal baby's cry. This was a shriek of pure, unadulterated terror. A desperate, guttural wailing that felt like it was clawing at the fabric of reality itself. She reached for me, her tiny hands grasping with a strength I didn't know she possessed, as if trying to physically pull me back from a precipice I couldn't yet see. And that's when the cold dread truly set in. This was no ordinary tantrum. This was an omen, a prophecy screamed from a cradle. Laura, with whatever preternatural sense she possessed, was screaming one thing into the void. Kedari Tombo! You will die. The room froze. We were all actors in a play who had just realized the script was a tragedy. My carefully constructed excuses about business trips and complicated political situations crumbled to dust in the face of this raw, infantile panic. This was the confirmation I had been hiding from them, the unspoken fear given voice. And then my goddess spoke. Roxy, holding our wailing daughter, met her desperate gaze and made a vow that shone brighter than any magic. I'll go with Daddy and keep him safe. Just like that. The crying stopped. The silence that followed was more deafening than the screams. The matter was settled, not by logic, not by strategy, but by a mother's promise to her terrified child. My arguments against her coming were, of course, annihilated with the serene efficiency only Roxy could manage. Point out the danger? So it is a trap you didn't tell us about? How convenient? Mention Rudeus' racism? I'll find another way. Worry about her career. I wouldn't trade my husband's life for a satisfying career. Checkmate. In a few sentences, she not only secured her place on the trip, but also managed to calm the now righteously incensed Sylphian heiress who had just learned about the trap part of the plan. Roxy Magurdia, everyone, a quiet force of nature who could negotiate her way into a war zone because her baby said so. The preparations began with a grim finality. I became an armorer for a doomed prince, outfitting Zanoba in a comically bulky suit of fireproof armor, because for all his godlike strength, the man was ironically flammable. I forged him a stone club so massive it would make a giant feel inadequate. I was essentially turning my refined, figurine-loving friend into a cave troll. He was less than thrilled with the aesthetics, but when your life's purpose is to be a blunt instrument for our treacherous king, I suppose fashion takes a backseat. Roxy's protection was more subtle but no less vital. A barrier ring, a life-saving necklace. I'd have wrapped her in a fortress if I could, but my wife is a seasoned adventurer, a master of her own craft. My job was to support, not smother. Though the urge to smother was strong, the final act of preparation was the most surreal. A visit to the floating fortress of Perugia Stola. We were ushered into his private art gallery, a sanctum I'd never seen, filled with pieces that spoke of personal passion rather than public prestige. It was a telling gesture, a mark of respect for Zanoba that I was merely piggybacking on. And Perugius, the ancient, prideful dragon king, saw right through our noble facade. He took one look at Zanoba and uttered the truth we were all dancing around. You intend to die then. He saw the resignation in his friend's eyes, the look of a man settling his accounts. His offer to simply remove Pax from the equation was tempting in its brutal simplicity, but Zanoba, in his stubborn, fatalistic honor, refused. He would play his part in the tragedy, no matter the cost. The most poignant moment came not from an argument, but from a simple, heartfelt admission as Perugius left the room. Zanoba Shirone, I shall miss our conversations. It was a eulogy for a living man, a recognition that the friend he knew, the fellow art connoisseur, was already gone. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with Ginger's intelligence report. The invasion was real. The kingdom was mobilizing. And then, the chilling detail, King Pax was accompanied everywhere by a man with a gaunt skeletal face. Some whispered he was the death god, one of the 7 great powers. Let that sink in. The man, God's trap, wasn't just a political ambush or a battalion of soldiers. It potentially involved one of the 7 most powerful beings in the world. This wasn't a pure hot tank. It was the lair of a leviathan. So our party was set. The suicidal prince, the worrisome mother, the loyal retainer, and me, Riri Skrayrat, the walking bait, armed with magic armor and the grim certainty that my infant daughter's terrified screams were probably the most accurate prophecy I was ever going to get. We were walking into a nation primed for war, ruled by a patricidal king and guarded by a potential incarnation of death itself. All aboard the Tragedy Express. Next stop, Shirone. Let's see if my plot armor's thicker than my daughter's dire predictions. And so, the eve of our grand departure arrived. The mood in the Greyrat household was, well, it was briefly one of post-coital bliss, which was promptly shattered by Leo's barking in Eris's battle. Ready fury. Because of course the universe couldn't let me have one peaceful night. Our midnight visitor? None other than my perpetually scowling boss, Orsted, looking like a grim specter being molested by my sentient tentacle gate. A truly poetic image to set the tone for the calamity to come. Our meeting spot was, as usual, a suspiciously dark and empty field. It's where all the best clandestine, world-saving conspiracies are hatched, you see. And the news he brought was every bit as cheerful as the location. That rumor Ginger heard? The one about the skeletal-faced knight? Confirmed? And not just confirmed, upgraded to a Category 5 Hurricane of Inopir. His name is Randolph Mirian, the Death God, 5th of the 7 great powers. Let that title roll around in your mind for a second. The Death God. This isn't some edgy mercenary nickname. This is an official, globally recognized title for one of the 7 most powerful combatants on the planet. And the man, God had apparently pulled some strings to rent him out like a piece of heavy artillery. Because why send a manageable opponent when you can send a walking apocalypse? Orsted's tactical advice was about as clear as mud. When you want to attack, defend. When you want to defend, attack. But also, don't be stupid. Fantastic. So my strategy is to fight on the principle of do the exact opposite of what your lizard brain is screaming at you to do. Simple, really. What could possibly go wrong? It's like trying to win a game of chess by letting your opponent checkmate you, but in a way that somehow makes you the winner. My brain was already tying itself in knots. To add a delightful layer of tragicomedy, Orsted then treated me to the Death God's backstory. A prodigy swordsman from a legendary lineage who had a dramatic falling out with his granddaddy, went on a walkabout, killed one of the 7 great powers to steal his title, got sick of the constant murder, hobos challenging him, and decided to pursue his true passion, cooking. He failed miserably, went bankrupt, and had to become a knight to pay off his debts. You can't make this stuff up. This man, this living legend who inspires terror across continents, is essentially a failed restaurateur. I half expected Orsted to hand me his resume, which would list genocidal swordplay and mediocre shuffles as key skills. The next morning's farewell was a heart-wrenching affair, a masterclass in dramatic irony. My family saw me off, each with their own worries and well-wishes. Sylphie, the anchor of my soul, asking for caution. Eris, stoic and tough, already mentally preparing to raise our child as a warrior regardless of gender. Little Lucy, in a rare moment of vulnerability, asking for a hug that nearly broke my resolve. And all the while, the memory of Laura's prophetic screams the night before hung over us all like a shroud. We were all actors in a play where everyone but the lead seemed to know the ending was tragic. Even our send-off from Sharia was layered with unspoken dread. Cliff, ever the good friend, tried to give Zanoba a saintly lecture on the value of life, which went in one ear and out the other. Meanwhile, Eleanor was giving Roxy marital advice because nothing prepares you for a showdown with a death god like some adventurous intimacy on the road. The woman is a force of nature. The journey through Perugius' fortress was a study in tense, racist bureaucracy. Roxy, my wife, a respected scholar and adventurer, was treated like a biohazard. She had to take a vow of silence, couldn't touch anything, and was escorted by a squad of glaring familiars like a common criminal. The sheer pettiness of it was astounding. A stark reminder that even ancient, powerful dragons can be insufferable landlords. The only bright spot was Nanahoshi's farewell to Zanoba, a genuinely touching moment between 2 exiles, one returning to a home he might die for, the other trapped far from hers. Zanoba's bear hug and his final, where unlikely to ever meet again, was a punch to the gut. He had already accepted his fate and was saying his real goodbyes. Then we arrived in Shirone. The capital, Latakia, was different. The air was thick with the metallic scent of impending war. The streets, once bustling with honest adventurers, were now crawling with hard-eyed mercenaries and thugs. And Zanoba? Zanoba was thrilled. He took one look at the militarized atmosphere and beamed, declaring that any red-blooded man would find it thrilling. Meanwhile, my own blood was running decidedly cold. We were walking through the jaws of the trap, and my best friend was complimenting the dentist's drill. So here we are, holed up in an inn, on the eve of our audience, with a king who is most likely a patricidal puppet, guarded by a failed chef who is also an incarnate god of death. My mission is to keep my suicidal friend alive, protect my determined wife, and outsmart a celestial being, all while following fighting instructions that sound like they were written by a confused philosopher. As I sat there, muscles coiled like springs, Roxy worked her magic. Not the fire and lightning kind, but the far more potent magic of a simple calming touch and a well-timed joke at my expense. She loosened the knots in my shoulders, and more importantly, in my spirit, she reminded me that beneath the magic armor and the world-saving prophecies, I'm still just Rudeus. A man who loves his family, makes stupid jokes, and is terrified of losing the people he cares about. One step at a time. That's all I can do. Tomorrow, I walk into the lion's den. Let's see if this particular lamb can tame the beast, or at least make it choke on its own trap. The moment of truth arrived. The grand audience, the stage was set for the first act of this tragic comedy, and we, the star players, walked right onto it. The throne room of Shirone's castle felt less like a hall of royalty and more like a predator's den, tastefully decorated with bloodstains from the recent family reunion Pax had hosted. There he was, Shirone, the man, the myth, the patricidal legend himself. He hadn't changed much physically, still built like a garden gnome with delusions of grandeur, lounging on his throne as if it were a recliner. And next to him, his Queen Benedict, a girl so vacant-eyed she probably thought the coup was a surprise birthday party. Pax, ever the classy fellow, was openly groping her right there in front of God and everyone. Charming, a true king of the people. But my eyes and every ounce of my survival instinct were locked onto the man standing beside her. Randolph Marianne, the death god. The name alone should send a chill down your spine. But his appearance, it was something else. This wasn't a man. It was a collection of bones wearing a skin suit, with a single disinterested eye that looked like a dusty marble. He was the 5th most powerful combatant in the world, and he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, probably needing dough or something. The sheer mundane terror of it was paralyzing. The audience was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Pax, the smug little puppet master, dangled the threat of the death god in front of us, like a cat playing with a mouse. "Shall we pit your mage against my walking apocalypse?" he asked, his voice dripping with Flock's casualness. My heart tried to climb out of my throat. This was it. The trap was springing shut. I was mentally preparing my emergency escape plan, create a smoke screen, grab Zanoba, and hope the death god was as slow as he looked bored. But then, nothing. Pax leaned back and dismissed it as a joke. Joke? The emotional whiplash was enough to give me whiplash. He knew my reputation, he said. He couldn't risk damaging his borrowed blade. The sheer, unbelievable arrogance of the man. He was so confident in his own security that he treated the potential murder of one of his biggest threats as a passing amusement. What followed was even more surreal. A heartfelt monologue. Pax, the boy king, launched into the story of his redemption arc. Exiled to the King Dragon realm, he met a quiet, ostracized princess, found love, and was inspired to become a better man. He studied hard, impressed the local king, and as a reward asked for the princess's hand. When his own family back in Shirone refused to take him back, the King Dragon Realm's king threw a tantrum, loaned him a death god, and helped him massacre his way to the throne. It was a story fit for a ballad, if the bard had a severe head injury. And throughout this entire self-aggrandizing soliloquy, not a single mention of the man, God. Not one. The most suspicious character was suddenly the king of the King Dragon Realm, a man who seemed to hand out coups and legendary assassins like party favors. Was he the disciple? Was Pax? Was it the vacant princess? The bored death god? The plot was thickening, and my brain was turning to soup trying to stir it. The climax of this farce was Zanoba's pledge of allegiance. When Pax directly asked if he had a problem with the whole usurping and murdering our family business, Zanoba delivered a line so stoic it should be carved in stone. Whoever holds the throne of Shirone. My life's purpose is to protect this kingdom from her enemies. No condemnation, no forgiveness, just pure, unadulterated duty. It was the answer of a man who had already made peace with his role as a sacrificial pawn. Pax, seemingly satisfied with this cold, logical loyalty, promptly dispatched us to the front lines at Fort Karon. Back in her guest room, which was really a nicely furnished prison cell with a guard outside, I tried to process the cognitive dissonance. Zanoba was happy. He thought Pax had become a worthy king. He admired his brother's pragmatism. The man who had sent him to almost certain death was now a figure of admiration in his eyes. The power of familial bonding, I guess, even when the family bonding activity is regicide. When I finally broached the subject of the man, God, the conversation took another wild turn. Zanoba, who had once thought my stories were pure fiction, now calmly accepted the existence of a malevolent deity pulling the strings of destiny. And his conclusion? I suppose I'll have to protect him in that case. Protect the pack from the man, God. My best friend, the man I came here to save from a trap, was now appointing himself the bodyguard of the trap setter. The iron was so thick you can build a fort with it. My mission parameters had just been scrambled. I wasn't just here to extract Zanoba from a dangerous situation anymore. I was now tasked with navigating a political and supernatural minefield where my ally's loyalty was to the very kingdom that might kill him, and his newfound goal was to protect the king who might order the hit. So, to recap, the death god is real and looks like he hasn't slept in a decade. The king is either a reformed character or a brilliantly manipulated puppet, and my best friend has decided his new life's purpose is to serve them both. The man, God's trap, was never a simple ambush. It was a web of duty, twisted familial bonds, and political obligation designed to ensnare Zanoba's soul so completely that he would walk willingly to his own grave, and I would be forced to watch, powerless to stop him. This wasn't a battle I could win with the magic armor. This was a battle of ideologies, and I was terrifyingly out of my depth. The morning after our delightfully unsettling audience with King Pax, I returned to the inn to find Roxy, my ever-vigilant goddess, looking like she'd wrestled a demon of insomnia and lost. But even sleep-deprived, her mind was sharper than most people's on their best day. Over a hurried breakfast, I laid out the bizarre events in the throne room, Pax's redemption arc, the bored death god, the complete lack of any obvious man, god influence. It was a confusing salad of information, and I was desperately missing the dressing of clarity. Roxy, in her signature Professor Migurdia mode, listened intently before serving up a chilling hypothesis that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just a suicide mission, it was a meticulously crafted crockpot. The ingredient? A token force of 500 men versus an invading army of 5,000. The recipe? Let us, the two super weapon mages, exhaust ourselves holding back the tide. And the final, deadly seasoning? The death god Randolph Marianne, showing up to finish us off when we were too drained to lift a staff. It was diabolical. It was elegant. And it made perfect, horrifying sense. The man god wasn't just targeting me, he was using an entire war as a blunt instrument. Roxy even pinpointed the likely disciples. The king of the King Dragon Realm, who started this whole mess, and a high-ranking official in the invading kingdom, ensuring they would march to their doom just to wear us down. The sheer callous scale of it was breathtaking. Armed with this terrifying new perspective, I confronted Zanoba. I laid out the brutal math the certain death Pax had assigned him. And how did he respond? With a smug, condescending smirk and a lecture on military theory worthy of a seasoned general. He'd already factored Roxy and me into the equation, you see. A Saint tier mage is worth 1,000 men, and since we were King tier or higher, we were practically an army unto ourselves. His unshakable confidence was both impressive and utterly maddening. He was treating this like a complex math problem, while I was seeing it as a pre-dug mass grave. When I pointed out that Pax was essentially using him as a disposable pawn, Zanoba just shrugged with a kind of serene fatalism. In war, sacrifices are often necessary. The man's loyalty wasn't to Pax. It was to the abstract concept of Shirone itself. He was a weapon, and he was content to be aimed even if it meant being fired directly into a brick wall. Trying to argue with him was like trying to reason with a particularly noble and stubborn brick wall yourself. So, with no other choice, we embarked on the journey to Fort Karon. The trip was a study in contrasts. Zanoba was practically giddy, pointing out adventuring parties like a kid on a school trip. Roxy was her usual unflappable self, calmly discussing labyrinth lore. And me? I was a tightly wound ball of anxiety, my stomach doing somersaults as the reality of Eeyore, actual large-scale people dying in droves sank in. I was the only one who seemed to grasp the sheer, terrifying weight of what we were walking into. When we finally arrived, Fort Karon was surprisingly impressive. Nestled at the fork of two rivers, it was a solid strategic stronghold. The soldiers, however, looked like they'd already attended their own funerals. Morale was lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut. They were outnumbered 10-1, and they knew it. Then Zanoba did something extraordinary. He didn't just take command, he staged a performance. He gathered the despondent troops and, with the flair of a master showman, unveiled his reinforcements. He introduced Roxy, a legendary figure in Shirone's military history, the architect of their anti-magic drills. The soldiers' eyes, which moments before had been full of despair, lit up with recognition and something dangerously close to hope. and then he introduced me, her star disciple. He spun a tale of king-tier mages from the Laplace War pushing back armies of 10,000. A blatant exaggeration, but the soldiers ate it up. He promised them victory, not with complex tactics, but with the sheer overwhelming force that 2 top-tier mages and a blessed child supposedly represented. He sold them a dream, and they bought it. The air, once thick with dread, now crackled with a desperate, fervent energy. As I stood on that platform, watching the soldiers roar their approval, my own fear began to recede, replaced by a grim sense of responsibility. Zanoba had lit the fuse. He had given these men hope. Now it was up to Roxy and me to be the artillery he had promised. The trap was set, the pieces were in place, and the enemy was on the march. We were the bait, the shield, and the hope for salvation, all rolled into one. Let the siege begin. Let's see if 2 mages and a miracle can really hold back an army, and more importantly, outsmart a god. The calm before the storm, or in our case, the frantic manic preparation before the hurricane of death makes landfall. Our little vacation at Fort Karon continued, and Zanoba, in his infinite wisdom, decided our first order of business was a lovely stroll through the potential killing fields north of the fort. He called it a date. I called it a heart-pounding exercise in potential premature death. The man was as cheerful as a tourist, while I was calculating the odds of an enemy patrol using us for target practice. His grand plan, once we reached the scenic overlook of our future bloodbath, was for me to engage in some extreme landscaping. I was to turn the open plain into an impassable nightmare of trenches, pitfalls, and it was, admittedly, a brilliant tactical move. Force the enemy to cluster at a distance, break their formations, and make their advance a living hell. So, like the good, magically overpowered excavator I am, I got to work. I sculpted the earth like it was clay, carving out valleys and raising walls until the place looked like a toddler's sandbox after a tantrum. It was satisfying in a destructive, god-complex kind of way. But of course, Zanoba, the suddenly revealed military strategist, was already 3 steps ahead. He pointed out the glaringly obvious flaw. Any mage worth their salt could just fill my beautiful trenches back in, or, hurl spells over them directly at our faces. So my new job description was updated: head landscaper and primary counterspell unit. Roxy and I were to be the magical artillery and anti-artillery system, all rolled into one. The pressure was mounting, and my role was becoming terrifyingly clear. The next few days were a bizarre mix of mundane chores and existential dread. I assembled the magic armor, my personal mech suit of doom, and patched up stone walls. Roxy, ever the educator, held magic lessons for the troops, becoming the fort's beloved instructor. Meanwhile, the soldiers treated me like a walking natural disaster. I'd stroll by, and they'd scatter like roaches. I'd transform their battlefield in a day. I suppose I couldn't blame them for being a little intimidated. It's lonely at the top, especially when the top involves being seen as a human being. And then, the news we'd all been waiting for with a mixture of terror and grim resignation. The enemy was on the move. The fort erupted into a controlled frenzy. Swords were sharpened, wills were written, and the air grew thick with the scent of sweat, fear, and determination. Roxy, my brilliant, unflappable wife, began inscribing a massive magic circle for a saint-tier fire spell on the ramparts. My job was simple: stand next to her and rain hellfire upon the approaching army. It was at this moment that my courage decided to take an unscheduled vacation. The reality of what I was about to do came crashing down on me. I wasn't fighting a duel. I wasn't defending myself from an assassin. I was going to kill people. A lot of people, faceless, nameless soldiers who were just following orders, their lives about to be extinguished by my magic from a safe, comfortable distance. The moral weight of it felt like a physical anchor tied to my soul. I turned to Roxy, my voice barely a whisper, and asked the question that had been haunting me. Have you ever killed someone? Her response was immediate, calm, and utterly shattering. Yes, I have, my sweet, kind Roxy. The woman who blushes at cheek kisses. She explained the harsh realities of her adventuring past, the fights for survival, the necessary violence. She was a product of this world in a way I still wasn't. Her pragmatism was a cold bucket of water to my frantic anxiety. When I confessed my deep-seated fear my reflexive hesitation to kill, she didn't judge me. Instead, she helped me trace it back to its source. My days in Dead End, the rule Rougeard instilled in us, the conscious effort I made to be better, to be non-lethal. I had programmed myself with a moral safety switch, and now, in the face of war, that switch was screaming at me not to flip. And Roxy's solution was perfectly, beautifully Roxy. If you can't do it, I will. You can just carry me to safety if I get tired. No judgment, no pressure, just unwavering support. She reaffirmed that my hesitation wasn't a weakness. It was a part of my humanity, a safeguard against becoming the monster I saw in the future diary. In that moment, surrounded by the grim preparations for slaughter, she was my anchor. A little ink-stained, adorably flustered anchor, but an anchor nonetheless. Just as I was steeling myself for the coming storm, I saw it. A group of soldiers, 100 strong, slipping out the back of the fort and heading into the woods. My blood ran cold. Zanoba, that glorious suicidal idiot, had put together a covert ops team to flank the enemy and, in his words, sever their chain of command at the head. And he hadn't told me. He knew I would have stopped him or insisted on coming, and he wanted his human ones safe on the walls. The betrayal was sharp and bitter. I came here to protect him, and he just walked into the most dangerous part of the battlefield without a word. The trap I feared wasn't just the army in front of us. It was Zanoba's own noble, foolish heart leading him into an ambush. And then, the alarm bells rang. A cloud of dust appeared on the northern horizon. The enemy was here. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the lead actor had just wandered off, script into the woods. The battle was beginning and my best friend was out there, a perfect pawn in the man, God's game. Let the slaughter commence. The air was thick with tension, the enemy army a seething mass of humanity on the horizon. And where was our glorious commander, the linchpin of this entire defense? Oh, he was off playing commando in the woods with 100 men on a suicide mission to capture the enemy general. Because why command from a safe, strategic position when you can personally charge into the meat grinder? Brilliant. Left on the ramparts with Roxy, my job was simple. Be the artillery. The enemy mages immediately tried to undo my beautiful, treacherous landscaping with a Saint Tier Earth spell. My response? A Saint Tier Wind spell, blown with enough force to scatter their magic like dust in the wind. It was shockingly easy, and they kept trying. 5 more times. It was like watching someone try to fill a swimming pool with a leaky bucket. They were operating on the classic logic of, we have more mages, we can outlast them. They didn't know they were dealing with a walking, talking mana reactor. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the man, God, wasn't involved here after all. His disciples would know better than to waste their time with a mana battery like me. Then came the charge, a slow, grim tide of soldiers pushing through my pitfall. Riddled nightmare. Our archers let loose a volley, a mere pinprick against the advancing horde. But it was a signal. It told the enemy we were relying on conventional weapons. They took the bait, surging forward with renewed vigor, and that's when we unleashed hell. Our mages began a staggered barrage of fireballs. The enemy countered with water balls, a desperate defense from a cluster of mages under a scorpion banner. Roxy and I shared a look. That was the target. With a deep breath and a silent apology to my former morals, I joined her. We didn't cast Fireball. We didn't cast anything so quaint. We channeled Roa, devastating power, and I killed them, a lot of them. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. The destruction of their mage core broke their spirit and their formation. They were ants under a magnifying glass. Roxy and I became a force of nature, calling down lightning and gales that swept men into the earth or turned them to cinders. From this height, they weren't people. They were moving specks, scraps of paper in a hurricane. The sheer impersonal scale of it was horrifying. And then, it was intoxicating. The fort erupted in cheers. Soldiers who had eyed me with fear now clapped me on the back, hugged me, thanked me with tears in their eyes. The ecstasy of survival, of overwhelming victory, was a drug. Roxy, my usually reserved wife, kissed me right there on the ramparts. In that moment, bathed in the adulation and the shared delirium, the thousands of deaths at my command felt abstract, manageable. Maybe this was the reality of this world. Maybe I could compartmentalize. Maybe I wasn't a monster for doing what was necessary. And then Zanoba returned. He looked like he'd wrestled a bear through a thorn bush and lost. His unit of 100 was down to 10, but he was triumphant, dragging the enemy commander, wrapped in my magical net, behind him. He had done it. He had turned our magical bombardment into a diversion and captured a royal prince, a bargaining chip that could end the war in one stroke. The soldiers hailed him as a hero, and it was a brutal, costly, but strategically masterful gamble. But his next words turned my blood to ice. "You must be weary after all your labors," he said, patting my shoulder. And then, with a grim finality, he added, "No war is won without sacrifice, Master Rudeus." Sacrifice. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Our spells, the cumulonimbus, the violent storm, they hadn't just hit the enemy. They had rained down on that forest, on Zanoba's men, on the soldiers I had eaten breakfast with. The chaos we created to enable his victory had also inevitably killed our own allies. I had been so high on the victory, so detached in my god-like position on the walls, that I hadn't even considered the collateral damage, the friendly fire. The men I was supposed to be protecting, the euphoria evaporated, leaving a cold, hollow nausea. The death god never came that night. The expected ambush never materialized. Instead, I was left alone with the grim accounting of our victory. The enemy prisoners I captured in a later raid, I took alive. It was a small, pathetic attempt to reclaim some shred of my humanity, to prove to myself that I still had that reflex, that I wasn't the unfeeling weapon I had become on the ramparts. Interrogating the captured prince revealed nothing. No man, God, no disciples, no grand conspiracy. Just a mundane war of aggression. It felt like a cosmic joke. All this paranoia, all this psychological torment for a straightforward military conflict, had we been chasing shadows? But that unsettling feeling remained. The trap wasn't in the battle. The trap was in the victory itself. It was in the cost, the moral compromise, the chilling efficiency with which we had slaughtered thousands. It was in the way Zanoba accepted the deaths of 90 men as a necessary price for a political victory. The man, God's game wasn't always about direct confrontation. Sometimes it was about making you a pawn in a larger, more brutal game and letting the horror of your own actions do the work for him. The ground hadn't shaken from a death god's attack. It had shaken from the weight of the graves we had just dug, both for the enemy and for a part of ourselves. And I had a sickening feeling the real tremors were yet to come. For 10 glorious days, Fort Karon was a bubble of triumphant euphoria. The war was all but over. A ceasefire was on the table, and I, the once feared foreign mage, was now a beloved war hero. Soldiers smiled at me, clapped me on the back, and, bless them, some of the female archers had a delightful habit of forgoing bras in their sleepwear. It was a good time to be Rudeus Grey Rat. The ghosts of the thousands I'd killed were slowly being silenced by the roar of camaraderie and the simple primal joy of being alive. Even my moral compass, which had been spinning like a top, was finally settling. I'd done what I had to do. This was a brutal world, and I have family and a god to fight. I could live with my actions as long as I vowed never to sign up for another war. Simple, clean, and best of all, Zanoba's duty was fulfilled. The northern threat was neutralized. The path was clear. I could finally persuade him to pack his bags, leave this den of vipers, and come home to Sharia where he belonged, to our unfinished projects and a life of peaceful obsession. I rehearsed my speech in my head as we washed our faces in the river, surrounded by his adoring troops. It was going to be a simple, heartfelt proposal. Let's go home and make figurines. But the universe, it seems, has a profound allergy to my happiness. Just as I was about to pop the question, the thunder of hooves announced an interruption. Ginger, Zanoba's loyal knight, arrived looking like death warmed over, having ridden herself to the brink of collapse. And the news she brought was a bucket of ice water to our victory parade, an uprising in the capital, led by a general named Jade, rallying behind a secret, previously unknown 11th prince. The royal palace was besieged. Tax was trapped, and Zanoba's response? Not a moment of hesitation. Not a second of deliberation. Let us head for the capital at once then. As if he were suggesting we grab a quick bite to eat. The man's capacity for immediate, self-sacrificial action was both awe-inspiring and utterly infuriating. What followed was a masterclass in tragic loyalty. Ginger, who had suffered directly under Pax's cruelty, pleaded with Zanoba. She reminded him of the hostages, the threats, the vile nature of the man he was rushing to save. She was the voice of reason, of righteous anger. And Zanoba? He deflected. He compared himself to Pax, calling them both fools. But when Ginger pointed out that his foolishness was a mask, a strategic play for survival, he denied it. He claimed he was just a simple man who wanted to drown in his hobbies, a puppet that could only move as directed. It was here that I stepped in. I wielded his own words against him, the speech about his life being a down payment for Shirone's defense. The war was over. His duty was done. He could leave with a clear conscience. But then he played his trump card, the one card I could never counter. Despite it all, he's still my little brother, and the only family I have left. And just like that, the fight went out of me. Family? The word was a spiritual nuke in any argument with me. He could have given me 100 logical, political, or strategic reasons, and I would have fought him on everyone. But this raw, illogical, sentimental attachment to the last shred of his butchered family, I was disarmed. Completely and utterly. In that moment, I saw it clearly. He wasn't coming home. Not now, maybe not ever. His destiny was here, tangled in the bloody roots of his homeland and his fractured family. My mission had failed before it even truly began. So, I did the only thing I could. I surrendered. I promised Ginger, who was now clutching Zanoba's leg in sheer desperation, that I would ensure he survived, no matter what. Even if Pax ordered his death, I would be the one to drag him back to safety. It was a pathetic consolation prize, but it was all I had left to offer. The Rudeus figurine business, the automated doll research, all the plans we had back in Sharia, they were ashes. The bittersweet grin Zanoba and I shared was a funeral for that future. So we're off to the capital, not to extract my friend, but to help him save the brother who doesn't deserve saving. We're walking back into the lion's den, guided not by strategy, but by the twisted, unbreakable bonds of family. The man, God might be laughing, or he might be nowhere involved. It doesn't matter. This tragedy is writing itself, and we're just characters playing our parts. On to the next act. Let's see if familial love can truly conquer patricidal tendencies. I'm not holding my breath. And so the rescue mission began in the most dignified manner possible, with me transforming into a magical pack mule. I hooked a wagon to my magic armor Mac. And proceeded to drag my nauseated wife and violently car-sick best friend across the countryside at a pace that would make a stagecoach weep with envy. 5 days of this bone-jarring, vomit-inducing travel, and we arrived at a capital city locked up tighter than a drum. The rebels had Latakia on lockdown, and the royal palace stood like a silent, foreboding tomb in its center. Our brilliant plan? To use a secret passage known only to the royal family. A classic. What could possibly go wrong? We found the entrance hidden in a quaint little watermill, because of course, the emergency exit for a royal palace is in a rustic shed. Very inconspicuous. After Zanoba demonstrated his singular talent for breaking and entering, by ripping a solid metal plate out of the floor with his bare hands, we descended into the claustrophobic, pitch-black depths. What followed was hours of trudging through a tunnel so narrow and dark it felt like being swallowed by the earth. The highlight was hitting a solid wall of dirt halfway through. A cheerful little surprise, courtesy of either Mother Nature or our clever rebel general. So I got to play human mole, tediously digging us a new path with my earth magic. 4 hours. 4 hours in that dank, airless tube. By the end, even Zanoba's boundless enthusiasm was looking a little frayed. We finally emerged, not into a grand hall, but into the very room where I'd first been imprisoned by Pax years ago. The irony was so thick you could taste it. This whole rescue operation felt less like a noble quest, and more like a guided tour of my greatest failures and embarrassments. The palace itself was a ghost town, eerily silent, completely deserted. No guards, no servants, no signs of life. It was as if everyone had simply vanished. The only signs of the outside world were the rebel campfires glowing ominously through the windows. As we crept through the haunted halls, we even passed Roxy's old room, or what she thought was her old room. In a moment of pure, unintentional savagery, Zanoba corrected her. My poor, embarrassed wife. I nearly committed a war crime on his foot for that. But it was a strange, poignant moment, a glimpse into the life Roxy might have lived if fate hadn't thrown us together. The tension mounted with every empty floor we passed. First, second, third, fourth, nothing. It was like walking through a beautiful, ornate coffin. The silence was deafening, screaming that something was terribly, terribly wrong. And then we reached the 5th floor, the king's chambers, the heart of the castle. And there he was, the desk gone. Randolph Marianne. He wasn't standing guard like a statue. Oh no! He was lounging, slumped in a chair like a bored office worker on a coffee break, complaining about the architectural impracticalities of placing the royal bedroom on the top floor. The man was critiquing interior design while a rebellion raged outside. The sheer surreal absurdity of it was more terrifying than any battle cry. His explanation for the deserted palace was chillingly casual. He'd used his demon eye, the Eye of Severance, a delightful little detail Orsted conveniently forgot to mention, to create a barrier, and everyone else had either fled or been killed. He was the last line of defense, and he was following orders. Pax was inside, anguished, staring out at the city, realizing that no army was coming to save him. When Zanoba, driven by fraternal duty, tried to push past, Randolph didn't even stand. He just moved. One moment Zanoba was there. The next, he was hurtling down the hallway to smash into a wall. The casual display of power was a stark reminder. We were in the presence of one of the 7 great powers. I tried to be the voice of reason. I tried to de-escalate. We were all technically on the same side, right? We were here to save Pax, and Randolph was guarding him. But then I asked the question, the one question that changes everything. Does the name man, God, mean anything to you? And he grinned. That skeletal face split into a rattling, horrifying smile. Yes, I'm familiar with the name. And just like that, the chessboard flipped. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. This wasn't even about Shirone's civil war. This was the real trap. The man, God's pawn, wasn't in the invading army or the rebel forces. He was right here, the king's own personal bodyguard, holding him in a gilded cage for reasons we couldn't yet fathom. The green glow of his enchanted sword filled the hallway, a sickly beacon in the oppressive darkness. Zanoba hafted his club. Roxy raised her staff, and I, standing there in my inferior mate, armor with a half-empty mana tank, knew we were about to fight a battle we were woefully unprepared for. The stage was set. The final, deadly piece was in play. The Death God was here, and he was smiling. Let the dance with death begin. There, in that darkened hallway, we faced the Death God. Our opening move was a thing of brutal, beautiful synergy. Zanoba, the unstoppable force, charged like a battering ram. I, the terrain manipulator, turned the floor under Randolph's feet to quicksand. Roxy, the precise caster, timed her ice smash to perfection. For one glorious moment, we had him. The 5th of the 7 great powers was off balance, stumbling vulnerable. My electric spell hit home, paralyzing him. This was it. Checkmate. I unleashed my shotgun trigger, a hailstorm of stone cannon spells, each capable of punching through a castle wall. This was the move that had impressed Orsted. It was over. And then, it wasn't. My spells didn't just miss. They vanished, dissipated into puffs of sand in midair. The reason? A stone of absorption, cunningly hidden in the palm of his gauntlet. A cheap trick, but a devastatingly effective one. While I was reeling from that, he pulled his masterstroke. A feint. A call to a non-existent Sir Death God behind us. My head, conditioned by his psychological warfare, snapped around. It was all the opening he needed. The world slowed. I saw the glint of his sword. I felt Roxy shove me out of the way. We tumbled down the stairs, and my hand came away from her shoulders stained red. In that heart-stopping, gut-wrenching moment, I was back in the labyrinth, watching Paul die for me all over again. The terror was absolute, paralyzing, but it was a glancing blow. The magical necklace and ring I'd given her, my paranoia, made manifest, shattered, absorbing the lethal force. She was alive. But my confidence was in pieces on the floor alongside those enchanted items. The cold, rational part of my brain shut down. All I could feel was the primal, screaming need to get out. But Zanoba, ever the stubborn noble fool, refused to retreat. He charged again, And this time, Randolph didn't play with his food. In a movement too fast for my foresight eye to fully track, his blade flashed. Zanoba's custom-made, magically reinforced armor shattered like glass. The armor crushing slice. The only thing that saved him was his blessed child physiology. A massive bruise instead of a bisected torso. The message was clear. We were children swinging sticks at a master swordsman. He could kill Zanoba with blunt force or fire magic. He could have nullified our spells from the start. He was playing with us. The enthralling blade wasn't just about feints in combat. It was about feints with the cut truth, keeping us perpetually off balance, second guessing our every instinct. Just as I was about to resort to knocking Zanoba unconscious to drag him to safety, the tension shattered in the most absurd way possible. I asked Randolph if he was a disciple of the man, God. His response? A casual admission that he'd only heard the name from a relative. He'd never met him. He wasn't a disciple. He was just a really loyal bodyguard who happened to have a stupidly powerful demon eye and a fondness for the only two people who complimented his cooking. We had just fought a near-lethal pants, soilingly terrifying battle over a misunderstanding, a catastrophic, idiotic jump to conclusions misunderstanding. The sheer monumental absurdity of it was enough to give me an aneurysm. All that fear, all that risk to Roxy and Zanoba for nothing. The fight was over. Randolph, now perfectly amiable, let us pass. The urgent matter he was guarding, Pax and his queen, consummating their marriage. One last moment of passion before the end. Because yes, while we were having our near-death experience in the hallway, King Pax was inside, having resigned himself to his fate. What we walked into wasn't a throne room, but a chamber of profound despair. Pax, standing on the balcony in his underwear, wasn't a king defending his castle. He was a broken man holding a final post-mortem on his own life. His monologue was a torrent of bitter, self-loathing realization. He recounted how every effort he ever made, mastering a spell, trying to rule justly, even recalling Zanoba, had been met with what he perceived as indifference, scorn, or failure. He singled out Roxy, blaming a sigh she gave when he finally mastered an intermediate tire spell for crushing his youthful spirit. It was pathetic. It was petty. And yet, in its own warped way, it was heartbreaking. This was the culmination of a lifetime of seeking validation and finding only hollow echoes. The rebel army at his gates was just the final, undeniable proof that the world had rejected him. When Zanoba, ever the optimist, tried to offer hope, to talk about learning from mistakes, Pax delivered the final devastating blow to his brother's mission. You don't understand a thing. You yourself could have led an army to this city, but instead there's only 3 of you. And the other 2 are here to keep you safe, not me. He saw right through us. He knew I was there for Zanoba, not for him. He knew he was truly utterly alone. And then with a quiet instruction to Randolph, he did it. He hopped over the balcony railing. Zanoba lunged for him, his grip so desperate he tore the metal railing from its moorings, and they fell together into the night. We found them in the garden below. Zanoba, bruised but alive, cradling the shattered body of his little brother. The last prince of Shirone, the man Zanoba had crossed a continent to save, had chosen to die rather than be saved by him. The question hung in the air, thick with grief and futility. Were all my efforts simply meaningless? In the end, the man God might have won. He might have orchestrated this tragedy years ago with a single piece of advice. Or perhaps Pax's own demons were simply too great. It didn't matter. The result was the same. Zanoba's duty, his purpose, his last shred of family, it all lay broken in his arms. There was nothing left to fight for, no kingdom to save, no brother to protect. With a quiet that was louder than any scream, he looked at me and said the words I'd wanted to hear for so long, now rendered hollow by tragedy. Let's go home. The mission was over. We had survived. But we had lost everything we came here for. Some victories are indistinguishable from defeat. And so, the dust settled. Not with a bang, but with a whimper, and the grim, pragmatic business of cleaning up the mess. Our first morbid task, what to do with Pax's body. I suggested a cremation, a dignified end, but Zanoba, in a voice stripped of all emotion, insisted we hand the corpse over to the rebels. It was a cold political calculation, proof of death to end the rebellion. the last service he could render to the kingdom that had already taken so much from him. I cleaned the body with my water magic, a pathetic attempt to offer some semblance of respect, and we carried the broken king back to his plundered palace. There we found Randolph, the death god, now a solemn nursemaid. He was preparing to flee, with the sleeping Queen Benedict, now revealed to be pregnant, secured to his back. Roxy, ever practical even in her shock, had silently helped him pack. The transition from mortal enemies to reluctant allies was so jarring it was almost comical. The fight, the terror, the shattered magical items, all of it had been over a catastrophic misunderstanding. The man, God's grand trap, was in fact a phantom. We're just idiots. The journey out of the city was a funeral procession for our spirits. We were a band of ghosts, hollowed out by fatigue and failure. Randolph, the legendary death god, even admitted that our coordinated attack had genuinely cornered him, draining his men. If I hadn't let fear paralyze me, we might have actually won. The knowledge was a bitter pill to swallow. My own cowardice, amplified by his psychological warfare, had cost us a victory that, in the end, wouldn't have even mattered. Before he departed into the darkness, Randolph offered one last piece of intel, gleaned from family lore. The story of his relative, the demon king Badigati, who had once been a disciple of the man. It was a historical footnote, a confirmation of the god's long-reaching influence, but it felt like a paltry consolation prize after the monumental failure of this trip. Back in the capital, the victors were writing their history. Tax's body was put on display, stripped and defiled, a propaganda piece for General Jade and his child king puppet. The city celebrated. The air was thick with joy and fabricated tales of heroic rebel battles against the tyrant Tax. The truth of a broken man leaping from a balcony was buried under a mountain of convenient lies. Zanoba trembled with a rage I couldn't fully comprehend, watching the only family he had left be desecrated by a populace that was largely indifferent. For days, we languished in an inn, trapped in our own private hells. Zanoba sat in silent, profound contemplation, his connection to his homeland severed forever. But the most devastating transformation was in Roxy. My wife, my unshakable goddess, was crumbling under the weight of a guilt I never knew she carried. Pax's final, bitter accusation had struck a deep chord. She confessed to me, through tears of shame, that she had sighed when he finally mastered an intermediate spell. She had compared his slow, hard-won progress to my own innate talent and found him lacking. In that moment, she saw herself not as the inspiring teacher I knew, but as an arrogant instructor who had warped a young prince's spirit with her unconscious disdain. She wept, asking me if she even deserved to be a teacher anymore. It was a heart-wrenching sight. The woman who had pulled me from the abyss now doubted the very core of her identity. All I could do was hold her and reaffirm what she meant to me. I told her that while one student may have been lost, others, like me, were saved because of her. It was cheesy, it was cliché, but it was the truth. My happiness, my family, my very life were testaments to her success. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about acknowledging the full scope of her impact. Slowly, the light returned to her eyes. When Ginger finally found us, the final act of this tragedy played out. Zanoba, having lost everything his royal status was supposed to protect, made a monumental decision. He would not defect to another nation to be used as a weapon. He would simply cease to be Prince Zanoba Shirone. He would return to Sharia not as royalty, but as a man named Zanoba to live for his passions. It was his ultimate rebellion, a quiet personal secession. Ginger, his fiercely loyal knight, didn't even hesitate. She prostrated herself, begging to follow him even if it meant becoming a mere supporter, forsaking her rank and any chance at a normal life. Her loyalty wasn't to the crown, but to the man. It was a powerful, almost tragic display of devotion. So this is how our grand rescue mission ends. Not with the salvation of a kingdom, but with the quiet retirement of a prince. We didn't defeat the man, God. We didn't stabilize a nation. We stumbled through a series of catastrophic misunderstandings, witnessed a tragic suicide, and barely escaped with our lives. Pax is dead. Shirone has a new puppet king. Zanoba is going home, but a part of him has been left behind in that garden, cradling his brother's broken body. We're returning to Sharia with the bitter taste of futility in our mouths. The only thing we truly accomplished was survival. And sometimes, in this brutal world, maybe that has to be enough. On to the next catastrophe, I suppose. And so, we return to Shirone. The prodigal prince and his entourage of emotional wreckage stumbled back home. The journey was smooth, a stark contrast to the turbulent chaos we left behind in Shirone. We paid our respects to Rudeus, who, in his ancient dragon-like wisdom, essentially told Zanoba, "Countries are a scam, good riddance," a sentiment I can increasingly get behind. We even saw Nanahashi, whose tearful farewell was now retroactively rendered comical by Zanoba's mere presence. Ah, the fickleness of dramatic goodbyes. But the real reckoning was yet to come. The walk to Orsted's office felt like a march to the gallows. I had to report a catastrophic failure. Not just a simple oops, but a universe-altering, timeline-shattering whoopsie daisy. Pax was dead. The future republic of Shirone was stillborn. And with it, the carefully orchestrated birth of a key figure in Orsted's century-spanning plan, the demon god Laplace himself. I entered Orsted's office, prepared to grovel, only to find him wearing a full-face helmet, a new fashion accessory courtesy of Cliff, presumably to mitigate his soul-crushing aura. It was unsettling, like a shark trying to look approachable by wearing a party hat. I launched into my report, a meticulously detailed confession of every mistake, every misread, every jump to a catastrophic conclusion. I laid it all bare, ending with the two words every boss loves to hear. I failed. The revelation that followed was a gut punch. Orsted confirmed the man. God had two disciples pulling the strings, the king of the King Dragon Realm and General Jade. They had built Pax up only to orchestrate his psychological destruction. A masterful, cruel play. But the real kicker was why Pax was so important. It wasn't about the man himself, but about the nation he would found, the Shirone Republic. There, a man named Bolt Macedonius would rise, and from his bloodline, generations later, the demon god Laplace would be reborn. This was the linchpin. Orsted's entire strategy for this century-long loop was to control the variables of Laplace's rebirth, to fight him on his own terms, conserve his mana, and then face the man-god. My failure didn't just mean we lost a king, it meant we lost the host map. Laplace could now be born anywhere to anyone. The coming war would be a chaotic, mana-draining nightmare, leaving Orsted too weakened to challenge the man. God. His verdict was grim and final. This loop is a failure. The weight of those words was suffocating. My entire second life, my family, my purpose, all potentially rendered null because I couldn't save one pathetic suicidal king. The despair was absolute. And then, Zanoba spoke. In a moment of sheer brilliant clarity, my often obtuse friend cut through the doom and gloom with a simple revolutionary idea. If a war is coming, he said, then we should start preparing forces of our own to combat them. It was so obvious, so elegantly pragmatic. Orsted's curse made it impossible for him to gather allies himself. But we could. We had 80 years. We could recruit powerhouses, people like Rudeus, maybe even the death god himself, and build an army to face Laplace, preserving Orsted's strength for the final battle. But Zanoba wasn't done. He stepped forward, knelt, and made a declaration that reshaped the entire narrative of our failed mission. He's the one who killed my younger brother. I beg of you, allow me to be one of your subordinates as well, Sir Orsted. I want to avenge my brother. In that moment, everything clicked into place. Zanoba's entire journey, his stubborn loyalty, his desperate rush to save a brother he barely knew. It wasn't just about duty or country. It was about family. He had finally understood the difference between humans and dolls, and in losing Pax, he found a personal, burning reason to fight. He was no longer a prince fulfilling an obligation, he was a brother seeking vengeance. Orsted, the perpetually calculating god, saw the value. He accepted Zanoba's pledge, assigning him to work under me. Our catastrophic failure had cost us a kingdom, but it had gained us a fiercely loyal and unexpectedly strategic ally. The chapter closes with a sobering reflection from Rudeus. He realizes he can no longer afford to be a passive pawn, relying on Orsted to clean up his messes. This isn't a game with save points for Orsted, it's a single precious life for Rudeus. The stakes are no longer just about the world, they're about his family, his future, his very existence in this timeline. The training wheels are off. The time for coddling is over. He must evolve from a follower into a true partner, or risk losing everything in this loop and being marked for death in the next. The mission to Shirone ended in tragedy, but from its ashes, a new resolve is forged. The battle lines are redrawn. The goal is no longer to outsmart destiny, but to overpower it with sheer accumulated force. The recruitment drive for the apocalypse begins now. The final chapter. We return to Sharia, to the familiar comforting chaos of the Grey Rat household. But the first sight to greet me wasn't a warm welcome. It was the whistling sound of a sword cutting through the air. And there she was, Eris, my very pregnant, sword-swinging wife. Except she wasn't pregnant. Her stomach was a sculpted six-pack. The baby was out. My brain short-circuited. In my absence, while I was off failing to save kingdoms and getting psychologically dismantled by a death god, my son had been born. I had missed it. The guilt was immediate. A cold stone in my gut. After all the failure, all the death, did I even have the right to feel joy? But then, I witnessed a scene that melted the cynicism right out of me. Julie, Zanoba's apprentice, came sprinting out of the house and launched herself at him, sobbing, declaring her love and begging him never to leave her again. It was raw, unfiltered, and utterly heartfelt. And in that moment, watching Zanoba hold her, a simple, profound truth hit me. When we came back alive, yes, we failed, miserably, but Zanoba, Roxy, Ginger, and I had walked out of that nightmare. We were home, and that in itself was a victory worth celebrating. The dam broke. I swept Eris into my arms, kissed her, and promptly got punched for groping her. Some traditions must be upheld, but the joy was real, untempered. I carried her to the house to meet my son, Aris. My sisters, Norn and Aisha, were there cooing over him, their faces alight with genuine, uncomplicated love. The sight of them, of this simple domestic happiness, brought me to tears. It was a stark contrast to the broken family I just left behind in Shirone. Pax, who couldn't love and wasn't loved. Zanoba, who longed for a connection that was forever out of reach. Here, in this living room, was everything Pax had died without ever knowing. And I was sobbing in the middle of it, surrounded by my wives, my sisters, my children, my family. It was in this vulnerable, cathartic moment that I decided there were no more secrets. I gathered my entire family and told them everything. The man gone, Orsted, the coming war, the true reason for my missions. I laid my soul bare and asked for their support, and one by one, they nodded. No hesitation, no fear, just unwavering, unconditional support. The weight I had carried for so long finally lifted. The chapter and the volume closes not with a battle plan, but with a strategic epiphany. Orsted's original plan, to control Laplace's rebirth, is in ashes. This loop is, by his definition, a failure. But as I reflect, I realize this might have been inevitable from the moment I, an irregularity, entered the picture. The old script is useless, so we write a new one. Zanoba's brilliant, simple idea becomes our new gospel. If the coming war will drain Orsted, then we will build an army to fight it for him. We have 80 years to recruit the world's most powerful beings, to forge an alliance strong enough to face the demon god Laplace and his forces, to preserve Orsted's strength for the final confrontation with the man, God. This is no longer about carefully placing dominoes. This is about building a fortress. My purpose shifts from being a restorationist, trying to put history back on a derailed track, to being a founder. I may not live to see the final battle, but I can spend my life laying the foundation for the army that will win it. I will create an organization, gather allies, and leave behind a legacy of power that will endure long after I'm gone. The mission to Shirone was a tragic, bloody failure, but from its ashes, a new, more resilient resolve is born. The goal is no longer to outsmart destiny, but to overwhelm it with sheer collective force. The recruitment drive for the apocalypse begins now, and for the first time, I face this impossible task not with dread, but with the unwavering support of my family and the clarity of a new purpose. It's alright to be happy, because that happiness is the very thing we're fighting to protect. Our stage is the royal villa of the King Dragon realm, a gilded cage for princes and princesses from vassal states. Officially, they're students, In reality, they're hostages, glorified insurance policies to keep their home countries in line. Most of them accept this life of luxurious stagnation, but a few have fire in their bellies. And one of them is our hero, Shirone, and what a picture he paints. Once a lazy, entitled brat, he's now a whirlwind of ambition, desperately trying to forge himself into something more through sword drills, magic, and study. Or at least that's the image he projects. Because his mornings lately are dedicated to a different kind of performance, regaling the silent, wide-eyed Princess Benedict with wildly embellished tales of his daring duel. Of the stories he tells, he paints himself as a dashing hero, single-handedly cleansing the slums of Shirone with flashy swordplay and earth-shattering magic. The reality, as he sheepishly admits under the weight of her unwavering gaze, was far less glorious, hiding behind his bodyguards, offering a paltry gust of wind magic. But here's the tragic beauty of it. Benedict doesn't care. In her world of neglect, where she's treated as an eyesore, Pax's stories are a lifeline. Her nearly expressionless face, which Pax has learned to read like a map, lights up with a silent, profound wonder. It's for this flicker of admiration that he spins his lies, building a fragile ego for an audience of one in a garden where everyone else looks at them with contempt. You can feel the duality of his existence. The grandstanding prince in the garden, and the seething, powerless hostage in the corridors, enduring the sneers of nobles. The worthless worm from Shirone is clinging to the deadbeat princess. Each insult is a dagger he has to swallow, his pride curdling into a bitter resolve. Just wait, you Kirk. You will see. It's the mantra of every underestimated soul in history. A promise of vengeance whispered into a void that may never listen. And then the smell hits them. This isn't just a scent. It's a character in its own right. A bizarre, paradoxical aroma of fragrant cooking and putrid cremation. It's the hook that draws our odd couple to the parade grounds, and what they find there is a scene straight out of a macabre painting. 5 squires, pale as ghosts, sitting at a table of despair, and their chef, a skeleton with a smile. The death god himself, Randolph Marianne, 5th of the 7 great powers, stirring a cauldron of bubbling, purple stew. The scene is pure psychological horror. The squires are convinced this is their punishment, a poisoned last meal for humiliating their master, High General Chagall. They see the skeletal smile and the unnatural stew and see their own demise. And who could blame them? Randolph's reputation as a shadowy assassin precedes him. The narrative expertly weaves this dread, making us, the viewers, believe it too. This is it, a dark political murder disguised as culinary charity. And here is where Pax, for all his posturing, does something genuinely stupidly brave. Spurred on by Benedict's silent plea, a tug on his sleeve that speaks volumes, he makes a choice. He cannot stand the thought of being looked down upon even by a death god. So in a magnificent act of theatrical bravado, he inserts himself into the scene. He, the gourmet prince, will sample this deadly fare. What follows is a masterclass in tension. Pax's internal monologue is a riot of fear, pride, and fatalistic resolve. He's convinced he's eating poison. He feels the numbness on his tongue and thinks, "Oh!" The toxin. He shovels the stew into his mouth, fully expecting an agonizing death, all for the chance to say he outplayed one of the 7 great powers. The sheer, stubborn audacity of it is both laughable and profoundly admirable. And the punchline? The twist that defines their entire future relationship? It's not poison. In fact, it's delicious. The numbness? Just a spice called Sanshuk from the demon continent, a tranquilizer for frayed nerves. Randolph, the feared death god, was genuinely just trying to cheer up some depressed squires with his uniquely styled home cooking. The entire setup was a colossal misunderstanding born from prejudice and paranoia. Pax, ready to martyr himself as a poisoned prince, instead becomes the gluttonous prince who heroically polishes off the entire pot to save the squires from a fate worse than death, a bad meal. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. In trying to appear a hero in the face of certain death, Pax accidentally becomes one by embracing life and a good stew. This single absurd event forges a bond. Randolph, touched that someone finally appreciated his cooking, becomes a recurring presence in their lives. The ostracized prince, the silent princess, and the skeletal death god form the most unlikely trio in the six-faced world. But the story doesn't end there. It fast forwards to Pax's endgame. He's king of Shirone now, but his castle is besieged, his reign unloved, standing on a staircase landing, looking out at a kingdom that has never accepted him. He has a final conversation with Randolph. The bravado is gone, replaced by the weary clarity of a man who knows his time is up. And when will I kick in? He asked all those years ago, expecting poison. To be honest, I rather wish you wouldn't die, Randolph mutters now, having finally found a friend. The circle closes. Pax, who thought he was dying for a cause back then, is now truly preparing to die for one. He entrusts Randolph with his unborn child and his wife, his only legacy. In this moment, we see the full tragedy of Pax Shirone, a man who clawed his way to the top with sheer force of will, only to find the summit desolate and cold. He gained a throne, but he never gained the love of his people. His only true allies were the ones he found in a garden and over a pot of purple stew. This chapter isn't about epic battles or world-altering magic. It's about the quiet, desperate connections we make in the shadows. It's about how a lie told to impress a girl can lead to a moment of genuine courage. It's about how the world's most feared assassin just wanted someone to tell him his cooking was good. It's a story that reminds us that behind every title, be it prince, king, or death god, is a desperately lonely person just looking for a place where they belong and someone to share a meal with. And so, Rudeus learns the hard way that you can't outsmart fate with brute force alone. A lesson paid for in the currency of a broken kingdom and Zanoba's shattered heart. In the end, this volume isn't about victory, but about survival and the grim newfound resolve forged in the fires of catastrophic failure. So what did you think? Was Pax a tragic figure or a pathetic villain? And just how good was Randolph's cooking? Let me know your hot takes down below, and if this delicious misery captivated you, do yourself a favor and dive into the light novels.